Let me start with a simple financial concept. Imagine you're an insurance company. Your business model depends on charging more in premiums than you pay out in claims. You've built your entire pricing model on one foundational assumption, that the cost of a claim will always be higher than the cost of the premium. That gap, the spread between what it costs to attack and what it costs to defend, is your profit margin. As long as that spread is positive, you stay in business. Now imagine your competitor finds a way to settle claims for a fraction of what your actuarial table said was possible. Suddenly, the spread that your entire business model depended upon no longer exists. The math that justified every strategic decision you've made, the volumes, the frequencies, the combinations, has been invalidated. And you don't have another business model ready because you never thought the math could change. That is precisely what Ukraine has done to Russia's aerial strike doctrine. Russia built a cost-asymmetry weapon, the Shahed drone, specifically to flip the economics of air defense against Ukraine. Cheap to build, cheap to launch, and designed to force Ukraine to spend millions of dollars in interceptor missiles to stop weapons that cost tens of thousands to manufacture. The spread was supposed to bankrupt Ukraine's air defenses before Russia ran out of drones to fire. Ukraine found a way to change the math, and over the next 20 minutes, we are going to walk through exactly how it did it, what it built, what it proved, and what it means for the future of warfare well beyond this conflict. We're going to look at 4 receipts, 4 documented, verifiable developments that tell the full story of how Ukraine built the world's most advanced layered air defense system under fire. Then we'll follow the geopolitical consequences, particularly the Gulf defense deals that are now translating Ukraine's expertise into strategic influence. And we'll close with 3 scenarios for what this capability means for the trajectory of the war. Let's begin. On the night of April 15, 2026, Russia launched a coordinated aerial assault against Ukraine. The composition was deliberate and familiar. 3 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, paired with a swarm of approximately 324 strike drones, including around 250 Shahed-type systems, launched from 7 different positions inside Russia and the occupied territories. The doctrine behind this combination is well established. Flood the air defense network with drone volume so that the high-value ballistic missiles, the ones capable of destroying hardened infrastructure, can slip through in the resulting saturation. Ukraine's response was, by any historical standard, extraordinary. All 3 Iskander-M ballistic missiles were intercepted. All 3, on the drone side. 309 of the 324 were destroyed, with 3 more tracked and apparently lost before they could reach their targets. The final interception rate, 96%, within 1 percentage point of the 95% target that Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov had publicly set as the objective for Ukrainian air defenses. That number alone, 96%, is a headline, but it is not the most important part of the story. The most important part is how Ukraine intercepted those ballistic missiles, because the method reveals something that the United States and NATO have not yet fully absorbed. A unit commander of a Ukrainian Patriot formation recently spoke to Air Command West, Ukraine's Air Force Command, and disclosed the operational reality of how Ukraine runs its Patriot systems. His statement is worth examining carefully. Quote, "In substance, we try to use as few missiles as possible. Even if the rules of engagement call for the use of 2 to 4 missiles against certain difficult targets, we destroy them with 1. Let that sit for a moment. The NATO doctrine for Patriot interceptor usage calls for between 2 and 4 missiles per target. That doctrine was established for a reason. It accounts for the imperfect engagement conditions that a crew with limited combat experience will face. More interceptors per target means more margin for error. It is a doctrine calibrated for the realistic performance of a trained but inexperienced crew. Ukraine's crews are not inexperienced. They are the most combat-hardened operators of the Patriot system in the world. Not by a small margin, but by an enormous one. Russia's relentless aerial campaign has given Ukraine's Patriot crews real-world engagement repetitions that no other NATO operator could accumulate in a generation of training. And that experience has produced a targeting precision that the doctrine's authors did not anticipate. The cost implications are significant and worth working through in concrete terms. A PAC-3 Patriot interceptor costs between $3 and $4 million per missile. Following the NATO doctrine against 3 incoming ballistic missiles could require up to 12 interceptors, a maximum expenditure of $48 million to counter a 3-missile salvo. Ukraine, firing 1 interceptor per ballistic missile, spent a maximum of $12 million to achieve the same result. A $36 million savings on a single night's engagement. Scale that over the course of a sustained air campaign, and the arithmetic becomes strategically significant. The U.S. reportedly expended over 800 Patriot interceptors in the first 3 days of operations in the Persian Gulf. Had U.S. crews demonstrated Ukraine's efficiency, that number could have been between 200 and 400, a saving of at minimum $1.6 billion on 3 days of operations. There is an additional technical wrinkle here that compounds the significance of what Ukraine has achieved. The Patriot system uses 2 distinct interceptor types. The PAC-2, which destroys its target through proximity detonation and fragmentation, and the PAC-3, which uses a hit-to-kill approach, direct physical collision followed by warhead detonation. The PAC-3 requires more precise targeting but produces more reliable results. The PAC-2 sacrifices some reliability for a greater engagement envelope. Operating both effectively in a 1 interceptor per target doctrine against ballistic missiles traveling at multiple times the speed of sound requires a level of targeting discrimination, fire control timing, and situational awareness that goes beyond what the system's designers publicly projected as achievable. The fact that Ukraine appears to be doing precisely this and doing it consistently in combat conditions under the pressure of simultaneous multi-vector attacks is not a minor operational footnote. It is a fundamental revision of what is understood to be possible with this system. That is receipt number 1. Ukraine has redefined the operational ceiling of the most advanced Western air defense system in the world. Under combat conditions, at a moment when its own stockpiles are critically constrained. The efficiency is born of necessity, but the necessity produced a capability that will permanently reshape how the Patriot is understood and operated globally. Now let's talk about drones, because the Patriot story, as remarkable as it is, addresses only one layer of the air defense problem. The far more volumetric challenge is the Shahed, and the economics of countering it are where Ukraine's innovation has been most strategically consequential. The Shahed drone was designed as an economic weapon as much as a kinetic one. Russia sources them from Iran and manufactures its own variants domestically. A single Shahed costs between 25,000 and 40,000 euros to build. That is, in the context of modern warfare, extremely cheap. The strategic logic behind deploying them in mass swarms was straightforward. If Ukraine is forced to use multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to stop $10 threats, or rather 30,000 euro threats, the arithmetic will inevitably exhaust Ukraine's air defense capacity before Russia runs out of drones to fire. This is the cost-asymmetry model. It was used by Iran against Israel. It was used by the Houthis against Saudi Arabia and U.S. naval assets. It has been the defining challenge of air defense for the past decade. No one had found a durable, cost-competitive answer to it. Ukraine found one, and it did so not by building a more expensive counter, but by building a cheaper one. Ukraine's interceptor drones cost between 1,000 and 4,000 euros to manufacture. At the low end, that is 1/40th of the cost of the Shahed they are designed to destroy. At the high end, it is still 1/10. The kill ratio favors Ukraine at every price point in the range. In March 2026 alone, Ukraine's interceptor drones destroyed 33,000 of Russia's strike drones. That is twice the number destroyed in February. Ukraine's overall drone interception rate rose to 89.9% in March, up from 85.6% in February and 80.2% in December. The trend line is not plateauing. It is accelerating upward while Russia is simultaneously launching more drones. March saw Russia increase its drone sortie rate by 28% compared to prior months. Ukraine intercepted more drones in a month when Russia launched significantly more of them. The Shahed-specific numbers sharpen the picture further. Russia fired 6,463 Shahed-type drones at Ukraine in March. Ukraine intercepted 5,835 of them. That is a 90.25% interception rate against the category of weapon that was specifically designed to overwhelm its defenses. Now let's return to the cost equation. Every Shahed that Ukraine's interceptor drones destroy represents a net economic victory for Ukraine. Russia spends between 25,000 and 40,000 euros to manufacture and launch a drone that costs Ukraine between 1,000 and 4,000 euros to destroy. Russia's aerial strike campaign is now losing money on every drone engagement. The asymmetric economics that were supposed to defeat Ukraine have been inverted. This is not a marginal adjustment. It is a structural reversal of the underlying cost logic of the war in the air domain. Russia cannot drone Ukraine into submission if Ukraine can neutralize drones at a fraction of the cost Russia incurs to produce them. The attrition model breaks in Ukraine's favor. The contrast with U.S. operations in the Persian Gulf underlines how significant this inversion is. The U.S. has been using multi-million-dollar Patriot interceptors and other expensive surface-to-air missiles to counter Iranian Shahed-type drones, effectively experiencing the cost-asymmetry problem in its most acute form. The interceptor-to-threat cost ratio in those engagements is catastrophically unfavorable. Ukraine, meanwhile, is solving the same problem with a solution that costs less than the threat it counters. That is receipt number 2. Ukraine has solved the defining air defense economics problem of the current era, the cost asymmetry of mass drone swarms, with a solution so cheap that it inverts the math Russia built its air campaign around. The Shahed was a weapon designed to bankrupt Ukraine's defenses. Ukraine turned it into a wealth transfer mechanism running in the wrong direction for Russia. Let's zoom out from the individual systems and look at what Ukraine has actually built. Because the Patriot mastery and the interceptor drone program are not independent innovations. They are components of a deliberate, layered air defense architecture that was consciously designed over an 18-month period. Vitaly Goncharuk, the former chairman of Ukraine's Artificial Intelligence Committee, has described the development process. Over 18 months, Ukraine systematically built out a multi-layer model in which each tool addresses a specific category of threat. There is no universal counter to Russia's aerial campaign, and Ukraine was the first actor in the modern era to operationalize that insight at scale. The architecture works roughly as follows. At the highest and fastest threat level, ballistic missiles traveling at multiple times the speed of sound, Patriot systems provide the intercept capability, now deployed with the efficiency protocols that Ukraine has developed. These are the most expensive engagements, and Ukraine's one interceptor per target doctrine is specifically designed to conserve the missile stockpiles that are in critical supply. At the mid-range threat level, cruise missiles, long-range strike drones, and the Iranian-derived systems that constitute Russia's primary strike package, a combination of systems, including NASAMS, IRIS-T, and various Soviet legacy platforms, provides coverage. Ukraine has become expert at managing these systems in concert, deconflicting engagement zones and sequencing intercepts to avoid wasting expensive missiles on targets that can be handled by cheaper means. At the lower threat level, the Shahed swarms that Russia uses both for direct strike and for saturation of the higher-tier systems. The interceptor drone force now provides the primary response. These drones cost a fraction of the threats they defeat and can be produced domestically at scale. And threaded through all of it is an artificial intelligence-enhanced command and control layer that processes the radar picture, assigns threats to the appropriate response tier, and manages the engagement sequencing to prevent expensive interceptors being diverted to cheap targets. This is the invisible layer, the software and processing architecture that makes the multi-system coordination possible at the engagement timelines that ballistic and hypersonic threats demand. The result is a system that has no single point of failure and no single critical vulnerability. Russia cannot saturate it with volume because the interceptor drones absorb the volume cheaply. Russia cannot punch through it with ballistic missiles because the Patriot crews hit with a precision that exhausts its missiles more slowly than the doctrine prescribed. Russia cannot outpace it with speed because Ukraine is already developing laser-based interception systems for the new jet-powered Shahed variants that Russia is currently fielding. That last point deserves emphasis. Russia is attempting to counter Ukraine's drone interception advantage by switching from propeller-driven Shaheds to jet-powered variants, faster, harder to track, and designed to exceed the flight performance envelope of Ukraine's current interceptor drones. As of mid-April, Militarny reported that Ukraine's interceptor drones are already successfully engaging the newer jet-powered variant. The adaptation cycle: Russia introduces a countermeasure, Ukraine fields a counter to the countermeasure, is running at a pace that consistently favors Ukraine. Ukraine is also developing laser-based air defense systems. These remain in prototype phase, but they represent the logical end state of the cost problem. An interception capability whose marginal cost per engagement approaches zero. A laser that can destroy a Shahed drone costs essentially nothing to fire after the capital investment in the system. If Ukraine brings that technology to operational deployment, the economics of Russia's aerial campaign become structurally non-viable at any volume. That is receipt number 3. Ukraine has not built a better version of existing air defense doctrine. It has built an entirely new doctrine, layered, adaptive, cost-calibrated at every tier, and continuously evolving faster than Russia can generate countermeasures. The 18 months development timeline was not an improvisation. It was a deliberate architectural project, executed under fire, that produced the most sophisticated layered air defense system currently in operational use anywhere in the world. Now let's talk about what Ukraine has built beyond the battlefield. Because the most strategically consequential dimension of Ukraine's air defense achievement may not be what it has done to Russia's strike campaign. It may be what it is doing to Ukraine's position in the global security architecture. Ukraine has signed decade-long defense cooperation agreements with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. In March, over 200 Ukrainian anti-drone experts deployed to the Middle East under the framework of these agreements. These are not symbolic arrangements. They represent a fundamental repositioning of Ukraine, from a recipient of Western military assistance to an exporter of hard-won military capability, to states that need exactly what Ukraine has developed. The Gulf states are not buying Ukrainian air defense expertise because they are sympathetic to Ukraine's cause. They are buying it because they face the same threat: mass Shahed-type drone swarms launched by Iranian proxies or directly by Iran against infrastructure targets at volumes that overwhelm conventional air defense responses. Saudi Arabia lost significant oil infrastructure to Houthi drone and missile attacks in 2019. The UAE has faced repeated drone and missile threats. Qatar's energy infrastructure is a premium target for regional adversaries. Ukraine has 4 years of live operational experience to feeding exactly this threat category, at scale, with increasing efficiency. No other country on Earth can offer that. Not the United States, not Israel, not any NATO member. Ukraine is the only actor that has solved the mass drone attrition problem in operational practice rather than theoretical modeling. The return on these agreements is direct and concrete. Weapons, fuel, and financial resources are flowing to Ukraine from Gulf partners who have significant incentive to ensure that Ukraine's expertise remains available and that Ukraine remains a viable partner. These are not aid relationships of the kind that have characterized Ukraine's relationship with Western supporters, relationships that carry political volatility, as the current American posture demonstrates. These are commercial and strategic partnerships between actors who have aligned interests. The significance of the American posture shift deserves attention here, because it is the structural constraint within which Ukraine's air defense innovation must be understood. Vice President J.D. Vance publicly described the cessation of military aid to Ukraine as, quote, one of the proudest achievements of the administration. President Zelensky described the Patriot missile shortage directly. The situation is in such a deficit, it could not be any worse. The combination of depleted stockpiles, U.S. missiles diverted to Gulf operations, and a stated U.S. policy of ending military support to Ukraine creates a supply environment that makes every efficiency gain in Patriot usage not merely tactically valuable, but existentially important. Ukraine is operating the world's most demanding air defense mission with a dwindling supply of its most critical interceptors against a backdrop of political decisions in Washington that have closed the primary resupply channel. The efficiency doctrine that Ukraine's Patriot crews have developed is not an academic improvement. It is the mechanism by which Ukraine stays in the fight. And precisely because it is solving this problem under these constraints, Ukraine's solution has become a globally marketable capability. The Gulf states are paying for the knowledge that the United States, paradoxically, helped create through the Patriot system it provided, and then left Ukraine to optimize under fire after withdrawing support. Ukraine has converted American military technology, sustained by its own institutional ingenuity, into an independent source of strategic leverage that does not depend on Washington's continued goodwill. That is receipt number 4. Ukraine's air defense mastery has become an exportable strategic asset, generating partnerships and resources from Gulf states that are partially replacing the Western support architecture that is currently contracting. The capability born of necessity has become the foundation of a new geopolitical posture. Let's ask the fundamental question: who benefits from what Ukraine has built? And what does the answer tell us about the trajectory of the conflict? The most immediate beneficiary is Ukraine itself, for reasons that are by now clear. A 96% interception rate on a mass aerial assault, achieved with constrained stockpiles, represents a defensive capability that Russia's planners did not believe Ukraine could build. Russia's aerial campaign was predicated on cost-asymmetry, the assumption that volume would eventually exhaust Ukraine's ability to respond. That assumption has been operationally falsified. But the second-order beneficiaries are the Western defense establishments that now have a live data source on Patriot system optimization that they could not have generated themselves. The U.S. has operated the Patriot in combat, but never at the engagement tempo Ukraine has sustained, never with the stockpile constraints Ukraine has faced, and never against the full-spectrum combination of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and mass drone swarms that Russia deploys simultaneously. Ukraine's operational data is irreplaceable. The question of whether U.S. and NATO establishments are actually extracting that data systematically, institutionally learning from what Ukraine has discovered, is one that serious defense analysts are now asking openly. The third-order implications are for adversaries who have invested in the Shahed-type mass drone model as a strategic weapon. Iran developed and proliferated the Shahed precisely because it inverted the cost economics of air defense against U.S.-equipped partners. Ukraine has now demonstrated that the inversion can be reversed. That demonstration will be visible to every actor considering a similar aerial campaign doctrine, and it will be visible to every potential target of such a campaign, evaluating its defensive options. For Russia specifically, the deteriorating cost equation in the air domain compounds a deteriorating situation on the ground. The spring offensive has been attenuated by the medium-range drone campaign we discussed in our previous analysis. The aerial campaign, which was supposed to compensate for ground stalemate by imposing civilian suffering sufficient to break Ukrainian will, is now achieving a 4% success rate at reaching its intended targets. The two complementary instruments of Russian strategy, ground advance and aerial terror, are both being degraded simultaneously by connected but distinct Ukrainian innovations. The compound pressure this creates internally in Russia is reflected in the polling data we have already examined. The All-Russian Public Opinion Research Center's 6-week approval decline for Putin is the visible surface of a deeper structural problem. The war is not producing the outcomes that were promised, and the cost in lives and resources is visible to a Russian public that state media can no longer fully insulate from the reality of the conflict. Let's close with the future. Ukraine's air defense achievement opens 3 distinct trajectories, each with different implications for the war's endpoint. Scenario 1. The defense holds. Strategic stalemate with shifting economics. In this scenario, Ukraine's layered air defense architecture continues to perform at or near its current efficiency levels. Russia cannot break through at sustainable cost. The aerial campaign continues, but its strategic effect, imposing sufficient civilian damage to fracture Ukrainian political will, is not achieved. The front line stabilizes in a condition of mutual attrition, with Ukraine's drone campaigns degrading Russia's offensive capacity, while Russia's aerial campaign is neutralized at the defense. The war continues, but the economic trajectory shifts progressively in Ukraine's favor. Russia is spending more per engagement than Ukraine. The Gulf defense partnerships provide a resource flow that partially compensates for reduced Western support. The laser air defense systems move from prototype toward operational deployment, further reducing Ukraine's marginal cost of defense. In this scenario, the war's endpoint is determined by political and economic exhaustion rather than battlefield decision, and the exhaustion metrics are moving in Ukraine's direction. Scenario 2. The technology gap accelerates. Ukraine achieves air dominance. In this scenario, Ukraine's continuing investment in interceptor drone technology, AI-enhanced command and control, and laser-based defense systems produces a capability ceiling that Russia cannot match. The jet-powered Shahed adaptation is countered. Laser systems reach operational deployment. The Patriot stockpile, augmented by Gulf partner resources and potentially by resumed European supply, stabilizes. Russia's aerial campaign becomes operationally unviable, not because Russia stops launching, but because the interception rate climbs to a level at which the strategic effect is zero and the economic cost to Russia is unsustainable. At that point, Russia's primary lever for coercing Ukrainian civilian capitulation is removed. Combined with the medium-range drone campaign degrading Russia's ground offensive capacity, this scenario creates the conditions for a Ukrainian operational initiative. Not a dramatic strategic breakthrough, but a sustained capacity to deny Russia the territorial gains that would justify the war's cost to the Russian public. Scenario 3. The stockpile crisis, a race against empty. The third scenario is the most dangerous near-term risk. Ukraine's Patriot stockpiles are, by Zelensky's own account, at critical deficit. The efficiency doctrine has extended their operational life, but efficiency cannot compensate for zero supply indefinitely. If stockpiles reach the point where Ukraine cannot sustain even one interceptor per target engagements against ballistic missiles, Russia's Iskander campaign against hardened infrastructure becomes operationally viable again. The management of this race, between Ukraine's efficiency extended stockpile life and a diplomatic timeline for restoring supply, is the central variable that will determine which of the first two scenarios is available for Ukraine to pursue.